And I know people have a lot of questions about this stuff. And while you're thinking about your questions, I'll tell you and wrap up some of the loose ends that I've started with in my story. I began with that patient, Jackson, who had been shot. He ended up getting colistin, and it gradually deteriorated his kidneys. Eventually, we found that the antibiotic wasn't working, and his bacterium became resistant to colistin. And at that point, we reached essentially what was a pre-antibiotic era. We had no other treatments for him, and we had to surgically remove the infection. And that's what we did in the pre-antibiotic era. We cut things out. Think about biting the bullet and cutting off someone's leg. That was because they had an infected lesion on their leg, and we didn't want it to leach into the blood. Because when infection gets into the blood, that's when problems result. Because it can go to the heart, the brain, the kidneys, the liver, and be a big problem. I also want to tell you what happened with the antibiotic. So this antibiotic had been approved, dalbavancin, in 2014, and my hospital said, we're never going to use it, it's too expensive. I ran this trial, the one that I write about in my book, and I don't want to give away too much, but it was such an extraordinary result that my hospital convened a special meeting and unanimously approved it. And it was a bittersweet moment for me. I was happy because we were adding this new drug, but I was frustrated that it took years of study and wasted time and effort. And I thought about all the patients who hadn't had access to it. And that process highlighted yet another challenge for antibiotic makers, which is that when they finally get their drug approved by the FDA, it's not like every hospital suddenly takes it up and says, okay, we're going to use this now. They have something called a Formulary Committee. The Formulary Committee looks at things like dollars and cents, and they buy in bulk. So if there are two similar antibiotics, they could go to both companies and say, make us a deal. That means that a lot of antibiotics don't end up on your formulary, which is different than for heart disease or cancer. When a new heart disease drug comes out, we add it. When a new cancer drug comes out, we add it. Part of that has to do with the money that we make off of these types of diseases. We don't make much money off of infections. I can tell you, I was told not to go into infectious diseases as a field. I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times pointing out that no one wants to be an infectious disease doctor anymore. The title that I gave it was, Where Have All the Infectious Disease Doctors Gone? They switched it to make it a little more clicky. It said, The Scary Shortage of Infectious Disease Doctors. I keep that in mind every morning when I read the news and I feel dispirited about all of the headlines. And I think, well, if they changed my headline to make it sound scarier, they're probably doing that for literally every other article that I'm going to read today. And I just try to keep that in mind, that I'm much happier when I'm thinking that someone's trying to manipulate me because I don't think the world's as bad as it seems when I'm reading the news. And then I want to add another thing about, so dalbavancin got approved, and that opened up a new pathway for me to do research. All of these companies started coming to me and saying, hey, can you get my drug on the formulary? And that put me in an ethically perilous position because I don't want to be some shill for these companies. But they're very nervous, the ones that make antibiotics, and they point to a company called Achaogen. This is point number 6 if you want to look up. Achaogen is Achaogen. They make an antibiotic called plazomicin, plazomicin, which was approved by the FDA in June of this past year. Of June of 2018. To tremendous fanfare. People said, we've got a new drug for superbugs. 9 months later, the company was bankrupt. And the reason for that is when the FDA approves a new drug for superbugs, they don't give it blanket approval and say, you can use plazomicin for whatever you want. They give it for specific indications like a urinary tract infection or a pneumonia or a bloodstream infection. And these companies gamble heavily on what they're going to get approval for. And they gambled wrong. It was approved for urinary tract infections, and we don't need a new drug for that. Stock price plummeted, company went bankrupt. 3 months after the company went bankrupt, the World Health Organization added plazomicin to the list of essential medicines. So this company invested $1 billion to make a drug that the WHO thinks is essential, and they couldn't make a single dollar off of it. Which lends credence to the idea that maybe these companies shouldn't be doing this at all. I'm not going to weigh in on that. You can read my book and you can see what you think about that argument. But you will be hearing more about this idea that the federal government should be the one who's looking after you and looking after the whole field of infectious diseases and antibiotics.